April 30th, 1943. The coast of Huelva, Spain. A fisherman pulls his nets from the cold Atlantic waters and sees something drifting in the surf. A body, face down, wearing the uniform of a British Royal Marines officer. Strapped to his wrist is a leather briefcase, locked, official-looking, the kind that might contain military secrets. Spain is neutral in this war, but everyone knows where its sympathies lie. Within hours, the body and the briefcase will be in the hands of Spanish officials, and within days, German intelligence officers will be examining the documents inside, documents that will change the course of the Second World War. But this is not the body of a British officer killed in action. This is not a tragic accident at sea. This is something else entirely. This is a deception, a carefully constructed lie, a dead man transformed into a weapon of war, and it will help bring down Hitler's Third Reich. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, the most audacious intelligence operation of World War II, the story of how a corpse fooled Hitler. By 1943, the war has been raging for nearly 4 years. Europe lies under Nazi occupation. The Eastern Front bleeds both Germany and the Soviet Union in a conflict of unimaginable brutality. And in North Africa, Allied forces have finally gained the upper hand, pushing back Rommel's Afrika Korps. The question now is, where next? Allied planners know the answer. Italy, the soft underbelly of Axis Europe, as Churchill calls it. An invasion of Italian territory will force Hitler to divert resources from other fronts. It will put pressure on Mussolini's increasingly fragile regime, and it will open a new theater of operations in the Mediterranean. But where in Italy? The obvious choice is Sicily, the large island at the southern tip of the Italian peninsula. It's close to Allied bases in North Africa. It offers multiple landing sites, and capturing it would secure control of the Mediterranean shipping lanes. The problem is that it's obvious. Too obvious. German intelligence will expect an invasion of Sicily. They will fortify the island, position troops, prepare defenses, and when the Allies land, they will face a prepared enemy in a battle that could cost thousands of lives, unless the Germans can be convinced that Sicily is not the target, unless they can be made to believe the invasion will come somewhere else. Greece, perhaps, or Sardinia. Anywhere but Sicily. This is the challenge facing British intelligence in early 1943. How do you deceive an entire enemy war machine? How do you convince Hitler's generals that their obvious conclusion is wrong? The answer will come from an unlikely source. A young naval intelligence officer named Ewan Montagu, and his colleague, an RAF officer named Charles Chumley. Together, they will devise a plan so strange, so macabre, that it seems like something from a spy novel rather than actual military history. They will take a corpse, dress it as a British officer, fill its pockets with fake documents indicating that the Allied invasion will target Greece, not Sicily, and plant it off the coast of Spain, where they know German spies are operating. The hope is that the Germans will find the body, examine the documents, and believe them to be genuine intelligence accidentally lost at sea. It's audacious. It's bizarre. It requires convincing forgeries, meticulous planning, and enormous risk. If the deception is discovered, it will alert the Germans that Sicily is indeed the target. making the invasion even more dangerous. But if it works, it could save thousands of Allied lives. The operation is codenamed Mincemeat, and it begins with the most difficult question of all. Where do you find a corpse? The idea of using a dead body for deception purposes isn't entirely new. Intelligence services have considered similar schemes before, but actually implementing such a plan requires solving numerous practical and ethical problems. First, the body must be appropriate. It needs to be a male of military age, reasonably fit, with no obvious signs of disease or injury that would contradict the cover story of a plane crash at sea. It cannot have been dead too long, or decomposition will make the deception obvious. Second, there are legal considerations. British law prohibits the misuse of corpses. Using a body without permission of the deceased or next of kin could result in criminal charges. The operation must remain secret, but it must also be lawful. Third, there's the ethical dimension. Is it right to use a human body, someone who lived and died and had loved ones, as an instrument of military deception? Even in wartime, even for a good cause, the idea troubles many who are involved in the planning. Montague and Chumley begin their search carefully. They make discreet inquiries through medical channels. They contact a pathologist named Bentley Purchase, the coroner for the St. Pancras district of London, who has access to bodies of people who died with no next of kin or whose families cannot be located. Purchase understands what's being asked of him. He agrees to help, but on one condition: the body must be treated with respect. It must be used for a purpose that serves the greater good, and after the operation is complete, it must be given a proper burial. In January 1943, Purchase contacts Montague. He has found someone, a man who died of pneumonia and exposure, 34 years old. No immediate family, no one to object to his body being used for this purpose. His name is Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh laborer who had been homeless, who had struggled with mental health issues, who had ingested rat poison, possibly deliberately, possibly accidentally, and died in a London hospital. He died alone, unclaimed, unmourned. Just another casualty of wartime London, where death is common and often goes unnoticed. But in death, Glyndwr Michael will serve a purpose he could never have imagined in life. He will become a hero. He will help win the war, and he will fool Adolf Hitler. The body is placed in cold storage. The work of transformation begins. Creating a false identity for a corpse is a peculiar art. It requires attention to detail that borders on the obsessive. Every aspect of the fictional life must be thought through. Every document must be authentic. Every personal item must tell a consistent story. The dead man will be given a new name: Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The rank is chosen carefully. Senior enough to be carrying important documents. Junior enough that his name wouldn't be widely known. A personnel file is created. Service records are fabricated. All official, all stamped, all appearing genuine. But documents alone won't be convincing. The body needs to carry the accumulated evidence of a real life. The small personal items that everyone carries. The things that make a person human. Montague and his team assembled these carefully. A photograph of a fiancée. Her name will be Pam. The photo is actually of a clerk in British intelligence who volunteers for the role. She writes love letters to the fictional Major Martin. Letters that are tender, intimate, filled with the yearning and hope of a couple separated by war. A receipt from a jeweler for an engagement ring. A letter from Martin's father, mildly reproachful about his son's financial habits. Ticket stubs from a London theater. A bill from a gentleman's club. Each item is carefully aged, exposed to the elements, carried in pockets. Made to look used, worn, real, the briefcase itself receives special attention. It must contain the crucial documents that will deceive the Germans, but it must also appear to be the working papers of a military officer on a routine courier mission. Inside will be 2 letters, one from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of British forces in North Africa. The other from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean. Both letters are forgeries, of course, but they're written on genuine official letterhead. They're signed with careful reproductions of the real officers' signatures, and they contain information that appears authentic, discussing operations in ways that real military correspondence would. Most importantly, they contain the false intelligence, references to operations in Greece, mentions of preparations for an invasion in the eastern Mediterranean, casual remarks that indicate Sicily is merely a diversion, not the real target. The letters are written to sound genuine. They include bureaucratic details, personal remarks, the kind of tangential information that real letters contain. They're not obvious. They don't scream secret invasion plans. They're subtle, which makes them believable. If German intelligence officers read these letters, they should conclude that they've accidentally intercepted genuine Allied plans. Plans that reveal Sicily as a feint and Greece as the real objective. Everything is prepared. The body, the identity, the documents, the personal effects that make Major William Martin real. Now comes the most difficult part. Getting him to Spain. The operation requires precise timing and location. The body must be released close enough to the Spanish coast that it will wash ashore, but far enough out that the story of a plane crash at sea remains plausible. It must be released in an area where German intelligence is active. Spain is officially neutral, but German spies operate throughout the country, particularly in ports and coastal cities. The body needs to be found by Spanish authorities who will inevitably share information with the Germans. The location chosen is near Huelva, a coastal city in southwestern Spain. The area is known for its strong currents that flow toward shore. There's an active German intelligence network in the region, and the local Spanish officials have proven cooperative with German requests for information in the past. A submarine is selected for the mission. Seraph, a small vessel that can operate close to shore without being detected. Her commander, Lieutenant Norman Jewell, is briefed on the operation in only the vaguest terms. He's told he'll be transporting a container with a body inside. He's told the mission is of the highest importance. He's told to ask no questions. Jewell understands. In wartime, there are orders you follow without understanding the reasons. This is one of those orders. The body of Glenwer Michael, now fully transformed into Major William Martin, is placed in a cylindrical canister packed with dry ice. The container is designed to keep the body preserved during transport, but will be opened just before release so the corpse can be placed directly in the water. On April 19, 1943, HMS Seraph departs from Holy Loch in Scotland. Aboard is the canister containing Major Martin. Aboard also is Ewan Montague, who has insisted on seeing the operation through personally. The journey south is tense. The submarine must avoid German naval patrols, must navigate through dangerous waters. The men aboard know they're carrying something unusual, something important, but few know exactly what. On April 30th, before dawn, HMS Seraph surfaces about a mile off the coast of Huelva. The sea is calm. The weather is clear. Conditions are as good as could be hoped. The canister is brought on deck. The body is removed carefully, reverently. In the darkness, the crew of the submarine looks at the figure of Major Martin, dressed in his uniform, the briefcase chained to his wrist. They know now. They understand. This is a dead man being used as a messenger. It's unsettling, strange, but they also understand the stakes. If this works, if the Germans believe the deception, it could change the war. The body is lowered into the water gently. There's a moment of silence as it floats there, face down, bobbing in the gentle swell, and then the current takes it. Slowly, inexorably, it begins to drift toward shore. HMS Seraph submerges and slips away into the darkness. The operation is now out of British hands. Everything depends on whether the body is found, whether the documents are examined, and whether the Germans believe what they read. All they can do now is wait. Hours pass. The body of Major Martin drifts in the Atlantic. The sun rises. Fishermen from Huelva head out for the day's catch. Just before 9:30 a.m., a fisherman named Jose Antonio Rey Maria spots something in the water near Playa del Porto. He brings his boat closer. It's a body. A man in military uniform. Rey Maria pulls the body from the water. It's clearly been in the sea for some time. The uniform is waterlogged. The skin is pale and bloated, but the body is intact. And there's a briefcase, secured to the wrist with a chain. The fisherman brings the body to shore and notifies the local authorities. The Spanish civil guard arrives. They examine the body and the documents they find in the pockets. Identity papers indicating this is Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Personal letters, theater tickets, the accumulation of a life, and the briefcase. Still locked, still chained to the dead man's wrist. The Spanish authorities understand immediately that this is significant. A British military officer, dead, carrying what appears to be official documents. They notify their superiors. The case quickly escalates up the chain of command. Within days, the briefcase is opened. The letters inside are photographed and copied. Spanish intelligence officials examine them carefully. And then, as the British planners had hoped, the information is shared with German intelligence. The German spy network in Spain, known as the Abwehr, receives the documents with great interest. Here, apparently by pure chance, is genuine British military correspondence. Letters from high-ranking officers discussing Allied operations. The letters are analyzed in Madrid, then sent to Berlin. German intelligence experts examine every detail. The paper, the ink, the signatures. The content. Is it genuine? Or is it a British plant designed to deceive? The debate within German intelligence is intense. Some officers are skeptical. The documents seem too convenient. Too perfect. Finding them feels like incredible luck, perhaps too incredible, but others argue for their authenticity. The letters discuss routine matters as well as strategic ones. They include personal references and bureaucratic details that seem genuine. The body carried personal effects that appear entirely authentic. The circumstances of death, a plane crash at sea, are plausible. Most convincingly, the letters don't obviously reveal invasion plans. They're not marked secret plans or anything so crude. They're routine correspondence between military officers that happens to mention, almost incidentally, operations in Greece and the eastern Mediterranean dot. If the British wanted to plant false information, surely they would make it more obvious. Surely they wouldn't rely on the Germans finding a body by chance. The documents are forwarded to the highest levels of German military intelligence. They reach Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr. They reach the desk of Adolf Hitler himself, and slowly the Germans begin to believe dot reports start appearing in German intelligence assessments. Allied invasion preparations observed in the eastern Mediterranean. Troop movements consistent with operations in Greece. Supplies being positioned in ports that would support a Greek campaign. The Germans begin reinforcing Greece. Additional divisions are sent to the Balkans. Coastal defenses are strengthened. Resources are diverted from other theaters. Most critically, they reduce forces in Sicily. If the Allies are planning to invade Greece, then Sicily is merely a diversion, a feint to draw German attention away from the real target. No need to over-defend at dot in London. British intelligence begins to see the results of the deception. Intercepted German communications reference the documents found on Major Martin. They discuss Allied plans for Greece. They report troop movements consistent with the false intelligence. The operation is working. The Germans have taken the bait, but there's still enormous risk. If the Germans discover the deception before the invasion of Sicily, they'll reinforce the island immediately. The operation will have backfired spectacularly. British planners maintain the deception through other channels. They stage false radio traffic, suggesting activity in Greece. They allow German spies to observe preparations at ports in the eastern Mediterranean. They do everything possible to reinforce the lie that Major Martin's documents told, and they prepare for the actual invasion of Sicily, knowing that thousands of lives may depend on whether a corpse floating in the Atlantic managed to convince Adolf Hitler. July 9, 1943. Operation Husky begins. Allied forces, nearly 500,000 strong, launched the invasion of Sicily. American and British troops land on beaches along the southern coast of the island. The Germans are surprised. Their forces in Sicily are inadequate. Many of their best divisions have been sent to Greece, expecting the invasion there. The Allied landing, while not unopposed, faces lighter resistance than had been feared. The beachheads are secured. The advance inland begins. Within weeks, Sicily is in Allied hands. The invasion is successful. Casualties, while still significant, are far lower than they might have been had the Germans properly reinforced the island. Operation Mincemeat has worked. The corps has fooled Hitler in London. The officers who planned the operation allow themselves a moment of satisfaction. They know they cannot yet reveal what they've done. The war continues. Other deceptions may be necessary, but they know that their strange, macabre plan has saved lives. Ewan Montague will later write, "We had done what we set out to do. We had made the enemy believe a lie. It sounds simple, but the execution was anything but. It required imagination, meticulous planning, and a willingness to do something deeply unsettling in the service of a greater good. The body that had been Glyndwr Michael, that had become Major William Martin, is buried in Huelva. The British request that Spanish authorities provide a proper military funeral. They want the deception maintained even after death. The funeral is attended by British diplomatic personnel from the local consulate. They stand graveside as the coffin is lowered. The Spanish conduct the service with appropriate military honors. A gravestone is erected. It reads, William Martin, born the 29th of March, 1907, died the 24th of April, 1943, beloved son of John Glyndwr Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. The last line is Latin from the Roman poet Horace. It is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. It's a lie, of course. The dates are invented. The parents' names are fabricated. William Martin never existed, but in a deeper sense, perhaps it's true. Glyndwr Michael did die for his country, though he never knew it. He served in death as he never had the chance to serve in life, and the words on the gravestone honor that service, even if they don't tell the full truth. The grave remains in Huelva to this day. Visitors who know the story sometimes leave flowers, a small memorial to an operation that changed history and to the man whose body made it possible. The full story of Operation Mincemeat remains classified for decades after the war. The participants are bound by the Official Secrets Act. They cannot speak of what they did, cannot reveal the deception, cannot explain how a corpse helped win the war. But in 1953, Ewan Montague publishes a book with government approval, titled The Man Who Never Was. It's the first public account of the operation. It becomes a bestseller. A film adaptation follows in 1956. The story captivates the public. The audacity of it, the strangeness, the fact that something so bizarre actually worked, but the book doesn't reveal everything. Montague changes some details, omits others. Crucially, he doesn't reveal the real identity of the corpse. Major Martin's true name remains secret. For decades, people speculate. Who was the man whose body was used? Did he have family? Did they ever learn what happened to him? It's not until the 1990s, more than 50 years after the operation, that researchers finally identify Glyndwr Michael. His name is added to the grave in Huelva, though the original inscription remains. Now both names are there. The man who was and the man who never was. The ethical questions surrounding Operation Mincemeat have never fully been resolved. Was it right to use a human corpse in this way? Even with official permission, even for a noble cause. There's something deeply unsettling about transforming a person's body into an instrument of war. Glindwr. Michael died alone, impoverished, struggling with mental illness. He had no say in what would happen to his body after death. He never consented to become Major William Martin. He never knew his remains would be deployed as a weapon of deception. Would he have objected if he'd known? Or would he have been proud to serve even in death? We cannot know. We can only note that his body was treated with respect, that it was given a proper burial, that his real name is now honored alongside the false one, that he is remembered, but the discomfort remains. The operation forced those involved to confront questions about death, identity, and the uses to which human remains can be put. These are not easy questions. They have no comfortable answers. Montague himself wrestled with these issues. In his writings, he acknowledges the strangeness of what they did. He notes that they were careful to follow proper legal procedures, that they sought to honor the dead even as they used the body for deception. But he also argues that the operation saved lives, that the success of the Sicily invasion facilitated by the deception prevented countless deaths that would have occurred had the Germans been properly prepared. By this logic, using one body to save thousands is not only justified, but morally necessary. The ends justify the means, particularly in the context of total war against fascism. Others are less certain. They argue that human dignity should never be compromised, even for military advantage, that there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, some methods that shouldn't be used, regardless of the potential benefits. These debates have continued long after the operation itself. They reflect larger questions about wartime ethics, about the boundaries of acceptable conduct, about what we're willing to do in pursuit of victory. There are no easy answers, but the questions themselves are worth asking. They force us to confront the moral complexity of war, the difficult choices that must be made, and the costs of those choices on human dignity and conscience. Operation Mincemeat was one of several major deception operations conducted by the Allies during World War II. Collectively, these operations saved countless lives by confusing German intelligence and misdirecting military resources. The most famous, Operation Fortitude, convinced the Germans that the D-Day invasion would occur at Calais rather than Normandy. Like mincemeat, it relied on false intelligence, carefully planted evidence, and the Germans' willingness to believe what their intelligence services told them. These operations shared common elements: attention to detail, patience, a willingness to commit resources to plans that might fail, and above all, an understanding of psychology, understanding what the enemy wanted to believe and giving them reasons to believe it. The British developed particular expertise in this area. The London Controlling Section, a secret department tasked with strategic deception, coordinated multiple operations across different theaters. They employed experts in psychology, theater, forgery, and intelligence analysis. They understood that deception isn't just about lying. It's about creating a complete, believable alternative reality. It's about thinking through every detail, anticipating every question, providing evidence that seems authentic because in most respects it is authentic. Major William Martin was convincing because everything about him was real except his existence. The uniform was genuine. The documents were on official letterhead with real signatures. The personal effects were actual objects, aged and worn. The story was plausible. The only fiction was the man himself. And even that was based on a real person, a real body, a real death. This attention to authenticity was the key to the operation's success. German intelligence officers, trained to be skeptical, examined the evidence carefully. They looked for signs of deception, and they found none, because there were none to find. Everything was genuine except the story it told. In the years since the war, Operation Mincemeat has been studied extensively by military historians and intelligence professionals. It's taught in courses on strategic deception. It's analyzed as a case study in successful intelligence operations. The lessons drawn from it have influenced intelligence practices ever since. The importance of detail, the value of patience, the need for psychological insight, the recognition that information warfare can be as important as kinetic warfare. Modern intelligence services still employ deception operations, though the methods have evolved. In the digital age, the battlefield has shifted to cyberspace, to social media, to information networks. But the underlying principles remain the same. Create a believable alternative reality. Provide evidence that appears authentic. Anticipate the enemy's skepticism and address it. Be patient. Commit to the deception completely, and understand that the goal isn't just to lie. It's to make the enemy believe the lie so thoroughly that they act on it, changing their plans, diverting resources, making themselves vulnerable. Operation Mincemeat succeeded because it did all of this perfectly. It created Major William Martin so thoroughly that even his gravestone tells his fictional story. It planted evidence so authentic that German intelligence experts accepted it as genuine, and it made Hitler's military planners believe the lie completely, causing them to make strategic decisions that contributed to their defeat. The operation's success also depended on factors beyond British control. It required the Spanish authorities to cooperate, sharing information with German intelligence. It required German officers to find the deception plausible. It required Hitler himself to believe his intelligence service's conclusions. Any of these factors could have failed. The Spanish might have been more discreet. German intelligence might have been more skeptical. Hitler might have overruled his advisors, but they didn't. The operation succeeded because of careful planning. Yes, but also because of luck, timing, and the Germans' own assumptions about Allied intentions. This element of chance is worth noting. Even the best planned operations can fail due to factors beyond anyone's control. A body might not wash ashore where expected. Documents might be too damaged by seawater to read. A skeptical intelligence officer might investigate too thoroughly and discover the deception. Montague and his team couldn't control these variables. They could only do their best to make the deception plausible and hope that circumstances would favor them. They did, and thousands of Allied soldiers lived because of it. There's a peculiar poetry to Operation Mincemeat. The idea that a homeless man who died alone in London could, in death, become a hero. That a corpse could become a weapon. That the dead could help win the war. Glynndwr Michael's life was difficult. He struggled with mental illness. He was homeless, indigent, unable to care for himself. He died young from rat poison in circumstances that suggest desperation and suffering. His death was not heroic. It was tragic. One more casualty of poverty and illness in wartime London. But after death, he served. He became Major William Martin. He carried false intelligence to the enemy. He fooled Hitler. He helped ensure the success of the Sicily invasion. He saved lives. There's something redemptive in that transformation. The man who had nothing in life gave everything in death. The man who was forgotten became famous. The man who served no one served his country. Of course, he never knew. He never chose this. The choice was made for him by men who needed a corpse and found one that suited their purposes. But still, there's meaning in it. The grave in Huelva stands as a memorial not just to a successful intelligence operation, but to the strange ways in which ordinary people become part of history, the small lives that intersect with great events, the unknown individuals whose stories matter, even if only a few people ever learn them. Glenmore Michael mattered, not for what he did in life, but for what was done with his body after death. It's an unusual form of significance, perhaps even an uncomfortable one, but it's real dot and it's honored. The grave is maintained. Flowers are left. His name is remembered alongside the fiction that was Major William Martin. He died pro patria, even if he didn't know it. Sweet and honorable, even in its strangeness. The Second World War produced countless stories of courage, sacrifice, and ingenuity. Operation Mincemeat stands among the more unusual of these stories, but it reflects themes that appear throughout the conflict: the willingness to take extraordinary risks for the greater good, the capacity for creative thinking under pressure, the recognition that wars are won not just by soldiers on battlefields, but by intelligence officers working in secret, planners developing strategies, and ordinary people whose contributions may never be publicly known. Ewan Montague and Charles Chumley were not soldiers in the conventional sense. They didn't storm beaches or fly bombing missions, but they saved lives. Their work, strange and macabre as it was, contributed to Allied victory. The same is true of the pathologist Bentley Purchase, who provided the body, of Lieutenant Norman Jewell, who commanded the submarine, of the clerk who posed as Major Martin's fiancé and wrote love letters to a dead man, of the forgers who created documents, the intelligence analysts who planned the deception, the diplomatic personnel who maintained it. All of them served. All of them contributed. All of them are part of the story of how the war was won. And at the center of it all is Glenmore Michael, a man who never wore a uniform, who never fired a shot, who never knew he was serving, but who, nevertheless, gave his body to the cause, who became the corpse that fooled Hitler, who lies buried in a Spanish cemetery under two names, honored by both. The operation he unknowingly participated in was a success. The deception worked. The invasion succeeded. The war turned, and in some small but significant way, his remains contributed to the defeat of fascism. It's a strange legacy. But it's a real one. In Huelva, Spain, on a hillside overlooking the Atlantic, there stands a grave. The headstone bears two inscriptions. One commemorates Major William Martin, Royal Marines' beloved son, died 1943. The other name's Glenmore Michael, the man whose body lies beneath. Both names are important. One represents what was done. The other represents who it was done to. Together they tell the story of Operation Mincemeat, a story of deception and ingenuity, of ethical complexity and moral compromise, of the strange things that happen in war when normal rules are suspended and extraordinary measures become necessary. The grave is visited occasionally by people who know the story: historians, intelligence professionals, tourists who have read about the operation and want to see where it ended. They stand there, looking at the stone, thinking about what happened, about the audacity of the plan, about the man who unwittingly participated in it, about the lives that were saved, because a corpse washed ashore carrying false intelligence. And perhaps they think about the nature of war itself, how it transforms everything it touches, how it turns the living into casualties and the dead into weapons, how it forces impossible choices and creates legacies that are both heroic and troubling. Operation Mincemeat was a triumph of intelligence warfare. It was brilliantly planned and flawlessly executed. It achieved its objective completely, but it was also deeply strange. The use of human remains as instruments of deception crosses boundaries that make many people uncomfortable. Even decades later, both things are true. The operation was both brilliant and unsettling, both praiseworthy and ethically complex. This is the nature of war. There are no clean victories, no choices without costs, no triumphs that don't exact a price. The price of Operation Mincemeat was paid by WWII, who gave his body without consent, by the men who planned the operation and carried the burden of what they had done, by the Spanish officials who were deceived, by the German soldiers who were sent to defend Greece instead of Sicily, some of whom died there. War extracts costs from everyone involved, from the victors as well as the defeated, from the living and the dead alike. Operation Mincemeat saved lives, but it required the use of a corpse. It required lies, forgeries, and elaborate deceptions. It required men to do things they might never have imagined doing in peacetime. This is what war demands. And this is what makes the story of Operation Mincemeat both inspiring and sobering. It shows what humans are capable of when desperate circumstances require extraordinary measures. The creativity, the courage, the willingness to cross boundaries in pursuit of victory. But it also shows the costs, the moral compromises, the uncomfortable truths about what we're willing to do and to whom when we believe the cause is just. These are the lessons of Operation Mincemeat. These are the questions it forces us to confront, and they matter, not just as history, but as enduring reflections on the nature of war, ethics, and the human capacity for both brilliance and brutality. The story of Operation Mincemeat is the story of a corpse that changed history, but it's also the story of the living, the men and women who planned the operation, who carried it out, who lived with what they had done. Ewan Montague lived until 1985. He never stopped thinking about Operation Mincemeat. He wrote about it, lectured on it, defended it against criticism. He believed what they had done was right, that the ends justified the means, that saving lives justified using a corpse. He may have been correct, but the fact that he felt compelled to justify it, to explain it, to argue for its rightness, suggests that he understood the ethical complexity, that he knew they had done something extraordinary that not everyone would approve of. Charles Chumley rarely spoke about the operation after the war. He moved on, worked in other areas, lived a quiet life. Perhaps he too struggled with what they had done, or perhaps he simply felt that some stories are better left to history than revisited constantly. Lieutenant Norman Jewell, who commanded MS Seraph, carried out multiple secret missions during the war. Operation Mincemeat was just one of them. He followed orders, did his duty, asked no questions. This was the military way. This was how wars were fought. And WWII, whose body made it all possible, lies in his grave in Huelva, silent, his story told by others. His service recognized, even though he never knew he was serving. Together, they are all part of a story that matters. A story about war and deception, about ethics and necessity, about the strange things that happen when nations fight for survival and individuals are asked to sacrifice more than they ever imagined. The corpse fooled Hitler. But the story does more than that. It makes us think about war, about right and wrong, about what we're willing to do and what costs we're willing to pay. These are important questions, and Operation Mincemeat, for all its strangeness, helps us ask them. The grave in Huelva remains, a memorial to an operation that changed history, to a deception that saved lives, to a man named Glendwer Michael who never knew he became a hero, and to the eternal truth that in war, nothing is simple, nothing is clean, and every victory carries a cost that someone must pay. But there's more to the story. Details that emerged only decades later, questions that still don't have complete answers, and consequences that rippled far beyond that July day in 1943 when Allied forces landed on Sicilian beaches. The success of Operation Mincemeat didn't end with the invasion of Sicily. It established a template for future deception operations. It proved that strategic deception, when executed properly, could achieve results that no amount of military force alone could accomplish. The planners who had worked on Mincemeat were immediately tasked with developing new operations. The lessons learned became doctrine. The techniques refined became standard practice. One of the most significant consequences was the expansion of deception planning for D-Day. The invasion of Normandy, scheduled for 1944. If the Germans could be fooled about Sicily, perhaps they could be fooled about the location of the largest amphibious invasion in history. The result was Operation Fortitude, a massive deception campaign that convinced German intelligence the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. It involved fake armies, phantom radio traffic, double agents, and elaborate staging. It was mincemeat multiplied by a factor of hundreds. And it worked. German forces remained positioned at Calais for weeks after D-Day, waiting for an invasion that never came. By the time they realized Normandy was the real target, the Allies had established an unbreakable foothold. How many lives did this save? Thousands, certainly. Perhaps tens of thousands. And it traced its lineage directly back to the lessons of Operation Mincemeat. The corpse that fooled Hitler about Sicily helped create the conditions for fooling him about Normandy. One deception begat another, each building on the success of what came before. But the story of Mincemeat also has a darker dimension, one that involves the people who weren't told, the families who lost loved ones and never knew why, the men whose identities were borrowed without permission. The photograph of Pam, Major Martin's fictional fiancée, was of a real woman. John Leslie, an MI5 clerk who volunteered for the role. She wrote the love letters that would be found on the body, letters filled with longing and affection for a man who didn't exist. Years later, she would describe the experience as surreal and troubling. She had created an emotional relationship with a fiction, had written intimate words that would be read by enemy intelligence officers, had helped construct a lie that used the language of love as a weapon. She never regretted her service, but she admitted it had affected her, the strangeness of it, the knowledge that her words, her photograph, had been part of something so macabre. She received no public recognition for decades. The operation was classified. She couldn't tell anyone what she had done. She carried the secret alone, as did so many others involved in wartime intelligence work. When the story finally became public, she was contacted by journalists, by historians, by people fascinated with the operation. She answered their questions politely but briefly. She had moved on with her life. The war was long past, but in quiet moments she would sometimes think about Major Martin, about the fictional man she had loved in letters, about the real man whose body had carried those letters, about the strange intersection of truth and lies that had saved so many lives. Then there were the families of the real soldiers, whose identities were borrowed for the deception. Major Martin's backstory included references to a father, to a home in Cardiff, to a life that seemed real because it was based on real people. Some of these people later discovered their names had been used. A real family in Cardiff found that fictional correspondence referenced their address. Real military officers discovered that elements of their service records had been incorporated into the false identity. None had given permission. None had been asked. It was wartime. Secrecy was paramount. Individual privacy was secondary to operational security. Most accepted this after the war. They understood the necessity. They recognized that their small, unwitting contribution had served the greater good. But some felt violated. Their identities had been borrowed without consent, used for purposes they hadn't chosen. These are the small casualties of intelligence work, the people affected in ways they never knew or knew only much later. The ripples that spread outward from secret operations, touching lives in unexpected ways. Operation Mincemeat succeeded brilliantly. But like all operations, it had costs beyond the obvious ones. Costs paid by people who never appeared in the official reports. The German officers who believed the deception also have a place in this story. They were, after all, the targets of the operation, and some of them paid dearly for their mistake. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, was among those who examined the documents from Major Martin and deemed them authentic. He reported to Hitler that the invasion would target Greece. He advised reinforcing the Balkans and reducing forces in Sicily. After the invasion proved him wrong, Canaris fell from favor. His judgment was questioned. His competence was doubted. While Operation Mincemeat wasn't the sole cause of his downfall, it contributed to the erosion of trust between German intelligence and Nazi leadership. Canaris would later be implicated in plots against Hitler. He was arrested in 1944 and executed in April 1945, just weeks before the war's end. His fate was sealed by many factors, but the failure to correctly assess Allied intentions in 1943 was among them. Other German intelligence officers who had vouched for the authenticity of the documents found their careers damaged. In the paranoid atmosphere of Nazi Germany, being wrong about enemy intentions could be interpreted as incompetence or even sabotage. Some were reassigned to less important posts. Others were investigated for possible treasonous activity. A few disappeared into the concentration camp system, victims of a regime that punished failure as harshly as disloyalty. These men were enemies. They served a regime that committed unprecedented atrocities. But they were also human beings, and Operation Mincemeat contributed to their suffering and, in some cases, their deaths. This is not to suggest the operation was wrong, but it's a reminder that deception in war has consequences that extend beyond the immediate tactical objective. The lies we tell affect real people in real ways, sometimes tragically. The Spanish authorities who facilitated the operation, knowingly or unknowingly, also faced consequences. After the war, when the full story began to emerge, Spain's cooperation with German intelligence during the conflict came under renewed scrutiny. Spain had been officially neutral, but its sharing of intelligence with Germany, including the documents from Major Martin, revealed where its sympathies had lain. This affected Spain's international standing in the post-war period. Spanish officials claimed they had been deceived along with the Germans, that they had simply shared information about a body found on their coast, not knowing it was part of an Allied deception. This was partially true. They didn't know it was a deception, but they had shared intelligence with a fascist power while claiming neutrality. This damaged Spain's reputation and contributed to its international isolation in the years immediately following the war. The local officials in Huelva who handled the body and the documents found themselves caught in a historical moment they didn't understand. They had followed procedures, reported what they found, cooperated with German requests for information. After the war, some were accused of being too cooperative with the Nazis. Others were praised for unwittingly assisting an Allied operation. The truth, as always, was more complex than either characterization suggested. They had been pawns in a larger game, used by both sides. Their actions, taken in good faith, had served purposes they never intended. This, too, is a consequence of intelligence warfare. The innocent bystanders who become part of history without choosing to. The technical aspects of Operation Mincemeat also deserve deeper examination. The operation required expertise from multiple fields, all coordinated seamlessly. The pathologists who prepared the body had to ensure it would appear authentically as a drowning victim. This meant understanding decomposition rates in seawater, the effects of submersion on human tissue, and the signs that medical examiners would look for. They had to make sure the body had been dead long enough to be found floating, but not so long that the deception would be obvious. They had to consider water temperature, currents, and biological factors. This was grotesque work, clinical and necessary, but deeply disturbing. The doctors and technicians who performed it were professionals, but the psychological toll of preparing a human body for use as a weapon must have been significant. The forgers who created the documents faced their own challenges. They needed to replicate official letterhead, match ink and paper types that would have been available in 1943, and reproduce signatures that would withstand expert examination. They studied the handwriting of the officers whose signatures they forged. They practiced for hours, getting every loop and stroke exactly right. They aged the documents carefully, exposing them to light and handling them repeatedly to create authentic wear patterns. This level of craftsmanship required patience, skill, and obsessive attention to detail. A single mistake, one signature that looked slightly off, or one document that used the wrong kind of paper, could have exposed the entire deception. The submarine crew of HMS Seraph also played a crucial role. Lieutenant Jewell and his men had to navigate dangerous waters, avoid enemy detection, and surface at exactly the right location under cover of darkness. They had to handle a container with a human body inside, knowing they were participating in something unprecedented. They had to maintain operational security, telling no one what they had done, carrying the secret for years. These were ordinary sailors performing an extraordinary mission. Their professionalism and discretion were essential to the operation's success. Yet their contribution is often overlooked in accounts that focus on the planning and strategic implications. Every person involved in Operation Mincemeat carried a piece of the operation. Every individual contribution was necessary. Remove any single element, and the entire deception might have collapsed. This is the nature of complex operations. They succeed or fail based on the coordination of dozens or hundreds of people, each performing their role perfectly, often without knowing the full picture. The planners understood this. They selected personnel carefully. They compartmentalized information, telling each person only what they needed to know. They trusted that everyone would do their part without needing to understand the whole, and it worked. Every piece came together. Every person performed their role, and the result was one of the most successful deception operations in military history. But success in such operations is never guaranteed. It depends on factors beyond anyone's control. The weather cooperating, the body washing ashore in the right location, the Spanish authorities responding as expected, the Germans examining the documents and reaching the desired conclusion. Any of these could have gone wrong. The operation could have failed at multiple points through no fault of the planners or participants. This element of chance haunted those involved. Montague later wrote that for weeks after the body was planted, he lived in a state of constant anxiety, waiting for news, wondering if it had worked, fearing that silence meant failure. When the first intelligence intercepts suggested the Germans believed the deception, the relief was overwhelming. But even then, doubt remained. Was the German response genuine, or were they playing their own deception game, pretending to believe while actually preparing for Sicily? Only after the invasion, when the lack of German preparedness became obvious, could the planners truly celebrate. The operation had worked. The corpse had fooled Hitler. The impossible had become real. But the anxiety they experienced during those waiting weeks was part of the price they paid. The psychological burden of launching a deception of such magnitude, knowing that thousands of lives depended on its success, was immense. These men couldn't share their fears with anyone, couldn't seek reassurance or support. They carried the burden alone, as the nature of secret work demanded. This isolation is another cost of intelligence operations. The people involved operate in shadows, their achievements unrecognized, their struggles unknown. They serve in silence, and often that silence extends for the rest of their lives. Montague broke that silence by publishing his book. But even then, he couldn't tell the whole story, couldn't name all the people involved, couldn't reveal certain operational details that remained classified. The full story emerged only gradually, over decades, as documents were declassified and participants died, releasing others from their obligations of secrecy. And even now, more than 80 years later, there are likely details that remain unknown, documents that were destroyed, conversations that were never recorded, decisions made in private that affected the operation's course. This incomplete knowledge is frustrating for historians. but inevitable in the study of intelligence operations. Secrecy is built into their nature. Some secrets remain buried forever. What we do know is sufficient to understand the operation's significance, the planning that went into it, the risks that were taken, the success that was achieved, and the lives that were saved as a result. The invasion of Sicily on July 9, 1943, was a turning point in the war. It led directly to the fall of Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy. It opened a new front that forced Germany to divert resources from the Eastern Front, easing pressure on the Soviet Union. It demonstrated that the Allies could successfully conduct large-scale amphibious operations, setting the stage for D-Day, and it succeeded, in part because a homeless Welsh laborer who died of rat poisoning in London was transformed into a fictional British officer and planted off the coast of Spain with false documents in his briefcase. The connection between Glenwer Michael's death and the liberation of Europe seems impossibly distant, yet it exists. His body became a link in a chain of events that changed history. This is the strange alchemy of war. How small things contribute to large outcomes. How individual actions, often taken by people who never sought fame or recognition, become part of momentous events. Glenwer Michael sought nothing. He was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But in death, he became part of something greater than himself. He served a cause he never knew existed. He helped defeat fascism from beyond the grave. There's something profoundly moving about this. The redemption of a wasted life through posthumous service. The transformation of a tragedy into a triumph. The way meaning can be found even in the most unlikely places. But there's also something unsettling about it. Michael had no choice. His consent was never sought because it couldn't be. The decision to use his body was made by others for their purposes. However noble those purposes might have been, this tension between the noble and the troubling, between the triumph and the ethical compromise, runs throughout the story of Operation Mincemeat. It cannot be resolved. It must simply be acknowledged. The operation was both brilliant and disturbing, both heroic and ethically complex, both a triumph of human ingenuity and a reminder of the moral costs of warfare. These contradictions don't diminish the operation's significance. If anything, they enhance it. They make it more than just a clever intelligence success. They make it a story about the human condition, about what we're capable of, for good and ill. When extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary responses, that the grave in Huelva stands as a monument to all of this, to the success of the operation, to the life and death of Glenwer Michael, to the strangeness of war and the way it transforms everything it touches. Visitors to the grave often report feeling a sense of profound sadness mixed with admiration. Sadness for the man who died alone and uncelebrated. Admiration for the operation that gave his death meaning and purpose. Both responses are appropriate. The story deserves both sorrow and celebration, both contemplation of what was lost and recognition of what was achieved. This duality is what makes Operation Mincemeat more than just a historical footnote. It's a story that resonates because it contains within it the fundamental paradoxes of war, the way necessity justifies actions that would be unconscionable in peacetime, the way individual suffering serves collective purposes, the way death can be transformed into a weapon that saves lives. These paradoxes are uncomfortable. They don't resolve neatly. They resist simple moral judgments, but they're real. They're part of the human experience of war, and they're part of what makes the story of Operation Mincemeat so compelling and so troubling all these decades later. The corpse fooled Hitler. But the story does something more. It reveals the complexity of moral choice in wartime. It shows us the prices that are paid, often by those who never chose to pay them. It demonstrates the strange and terrible creativity that war demands and produces. And it leaves us with questions that have no easy answers. Questions about ends and means, about individual rights and collective needs, about what we owe the dead and what we owe the living. These questions matter, not just as historical inquiry, but as ongoing moral reflection. Because the circumstances that created Operation Mincemeat, the desperate need to deceive an enemy and save lives, are not unique to 1943. They recur throughout history, in different forms and different conflicts. And each time they do, we must ask again, what are we willing to do? What lines are we willing to cross? What prices are we willing to pay, and who will be asked to pay them? Operation Mincemeat provides no universal answers to these questions, but it provides a specific, detailed example of how one group of people answered them in one particular set of circumstances. They chose to use a corpse as a weapon. They chose deception over direct action. They chose to sacrifice the dignity of the dead for the lives of the living. And they succeeded. Whether that success justifies the means is a question each person must answer for themselves. There is no objective standard, no universal rule, only individual conscience and the weight of circumstance. This is the final lesson of Operation Mincemeat. That in war, moral certainty is a luxury few can afford. That the choices we make are rarely between good and evil, but between lesser evils and greater goods. That the people who make these choices carry the burden of them for the rest of their lives. Montague carried that burden. So did everyone else involved. They made their choice. They executed it brilliantly. They achieved their objective. And then they had to live with what they had done. The grave in Huelva remains a place of memory, a place of reflection, a place where the strange and troubling story of Operation Mincemeat is made tangible in stone and earth. Two names on one gravestone, one fiction and one truth, together telling a story that encompasses heroism and horror, triumph and tragedy, brilliant success and ethical complexity. This is the story of the corpse that fooled Hitler. This is Operation Mincemeat. This is history in all its uncomfortable, compelling, unforgettable reality.